Welcome back to Political Insight Live, friends. We're coming to you today from the traditional unceded territory of the First Nations peoples, who have called this land for countless generations, tonight. Tonight, folks, Canada has achieved something that nearly every south of the border swore was impossible, even with Donald Trump's tough 35% tariff push, aimed straight at hammering Ottawa's economy. Prime Minister Mark Carney's Canada isn't merely hanging in there, it's actually expanding and thriving, slowly losing jobs at the same time as key swing states in America are slowly down and political ground as we head toward the 2026 midterms. And the story you're about to hear is going to completely shift your perspective on this ongoing trade battle, with the big announcement from just last week that sent ripples all the way to Washington. Canada's Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne stood in front of the Press and shared some numbers that went against pretty much every forecast from the Trump team. He confirmed that the federal deficit is going to be smaller than what everyone expected, and the economy is locked into a solid growth path as we move toward 20 momentum is unfolding, right in the middle of what many thought would be a full economic assault on Ottawa. And get this positive momentum assault. Those American experts who had been forecasting a total Canadian meltdown for the past year are now rushing to figure out where their predictions went off track. Back in Ottawa, the mood is calm yet clearly self-assured. Mark Carney, who stepped into the role vowing to meet Trump's tariff tactics with smart, deliberate pushback, now has the hard data to whole script his plan is working. Those figures are rewriting the whole script in a dramatic way. While Carney's team is celebrating better fiscal health, things look quite different down in the American border regions. Just recently, the Detroit News ran a story highlighting how Canadian visits and spending in Michigan have basically dried up. The political consequences are now putting pressure on 3 Republican candidates running in tight 2026 congressional races. Think about it. The very people Trump said he'd safeguard are seeing their local economies take a hit because Canadians simply aren't coming around anymore. Let me share the statistic that's got governors in those border states losing sleep. Canadian trips to the United States plummeted by 40% back in February 2025 and are now intentionally it. Recent polls show that 62% of Canadians looking to skip travel to America altogether. This isn't some short-lived protest sparked by one headline. No, this feels like a deeper cultural change, a purposeful shift in consumer habits. Tourism officials stretching from Maine all the way to Washington state are sounding alarms that the losses could stick around for good. Hotels that relied heavily on Canadian guests are trimming their workforce. Eateries close to the border are shutting down sooner than usual. Mom-and-pop shops that centered their business on cross-border shoppers are struggling to stay afloat, and surprisingly, this isn't getting much airtime in the big American news networks. In the meantime, Canada has been making moves that the Trump administration clearly didn't see coming. Prime Minister Carney has pushed hard on diversification efforts. He's forging fresh trade ties, reshaping supply lines, and cutting back on how much Canada leans on the U.S. market, changes that are built to endure well beyond by Carney 28. A top geopolitical analysis firm called the Eurasia Group has described the present U.S.-Canada trade setup as a zombie USMCA. It's not completely alive, but it's not dead either. Trump keeps targeting specific areas like cars, steel, and aluminum with tariffs, yet the core agreement still protects the bulk of the trade between the two countries. That safety net, paired with Carney's smart diversification, is precisely what's allowing Canada to grow wheeze. Next up, I'll break down exactly how Canada's toughness is working, and why it seems Trump's inner circle missed this entirely. The secret to Canada's unexpected strength is right there in front of us, and once it clicks, the whole picture makes perfect sense. It all traces back to one key agreement that Donald Trump actually put his name on during his earlier time in office. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA for short, includes built-in rules that have basically softened the blow of those 35% tariff warnings on the biggest chunk of Canadian shipments to the U.S. More than 85% of the trade between Canada and the United States keeps moving without any tariffs thanks to this deal. Let me detail unlock so much of what's happening. Let me explain what this really means day to day. When Trump rolled out his 35% tariff plan, the global headlines made it sound like every slammed with that extra cost. But on the ground, it's a very different reality. Products that meet the USMCA's rules about where they come from and how much North American content they have still crossed the border facing that 35% hit. We're talking cars put together with enough local parts, farm goods that follow the guidelines, and factory items created inside our shared continental production system. They keep flowing much like before. Sure, the tariffs are biting into certain industries and items that don't qualify, but the overall Canadian economy has kept its doorway open to the American marketplace through the very pact Trump helped create. That's why the what other nations are dealing with stays much lighter compared to what other nations are dealing with in this broader trade dispute. Mark Carney spotted this built-in edge right away and shaped his whole counter-strategy around it. Instead of getting rattled or rushing into bad compromises, his administration embraced the safeguards already in the USMCA and quietly got ready for the areas that would feel the pinch anyway, and those production in Canada slowed down. Auto production, steelges, steel and aluminum makers dealt with serious challenges, and some farm exporters saw their profits squeezed. But Carney had a plan in place. He rolled out a $1.5 billion support program tailored to help the impacted sectors weather the storm, and then added a $500 million regional initiative focused on the specific places hit hardest by the targeted tariffs. This wasn't some last-minute scrambling. It was thoughtful, well-prepared, and carried out with real focus. Yet the smartest strategic step Carney took might have been far from any bargaining table here in North America. Canada has pulled off in a long time. He reached out to Beijing. Stanza has pulled off in a long time. Eberthurg I'm. Under the agreement, Canada is welcoming 49,000 Chinese-made electric vehicles with lower tariffs. In return, China is cutting its own taxes on Canadian cars who would have been hurt the worst by extended U.S. Consider SAR and Farmerless Crabben. The mist is soft. Tariffs now have a huge new marketplace ready and waiting right when they need it most. Canola growers out in Saskatchewan, lobster crab fishermen on the coasts, they're all gaining access to alternative customers, offering fair prices. This is diversification done right, by leaders who isn't interested in trading insults with Trump. Carney isn't interested in trading partner as operates. He's systematically lowering Canada's vulnerability to U.S. economic pressure, one industry and one partner at a time. With every new deal signed and every fresh market unlocked, those future tariff threats from past America lose some of their power. It gets tougher for any upcoming U.S. government to wield trade as a stick against Canada. In the following part, I'll walk you through precisely how everyday American voters are footing the bill for this policy misstep. Now let's flip the lens and look at what's unfolding on the American side, because the situation in those border states deserves to be front and center in this year's political talk, yet it's hardly getting noticed by the national press. Trump's trade offensive was pitched to voters as the way to make Canada back down and bring opportunities back home. But the results have flipped that script completely. The places taking the biggest hits are the very swing state areas that help put Trump in power, and it's Carney that's showing real economic vitality. Michigan offers the most telling example, with some eye-popping figures. That Detroit News piece I referenced earlier lays out how it vanished from the southeast part of the state. Casinos counting on folks driving over from Windsor are seeing their revenues drop by double digits. And hotels around Detroit that plan their bookings around Canadian fans coming for Tigers, Red Wings, and Pistons games are losing big chunks of their customer base. Spots in Greektown and by the waterfront are shortening their operating hours. And this is the detail worrying GOP campaign pros. 3 key 2026 House races in Michigan now have this local economic hurt front and center, with Democratic opponents pointing to closed businesses as proof that Trump's trade moves are hurting folks at home. Michigan isn't alone, though. The same trend is showing up all along the northern border. The Niagara Falls area in New York has watched Canadian tourist numbers tank. The ski areas in Vermont and New Hampshire that drew crowds from Quebec and Ontario are dealing with lots of empty rooms on busy weekends. Retailers in Washington State's Bellingham and Blaine, shops that basically lived off Canadian day trippers, are now facing that seemed crazy just a couple years back. Maine's seaside tourism spots are in the same boat. Decisions that seem tourism is gone, and border communities in Minnesota are seeing their downtowns empty out, but Washington's a localized issue. Why the silence? It's a bit awkward to say the other way. Why the silence? It's a bit awkward to say out loud, but acknowledging that Canadians have pulled together one of the strongest North American history would mean admitting Trump's tariff plan has backfired in a major way. That's 62% of Canadians steering clear of U.S. Travel isn't something you can easily dismiss. It every day to take their spending elsewhere. Families who once packed up the car for Florida vacations are now heading to Mexico or Viewspawn. Flying to now or vacationing at home is in fact. Retirees who wintered in Arizona are picking Portugal or Canadians instead. Companies that held big meetings in Vegas or Orlando are moving them to Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. Circulators means choices circulate fewer in American towns, and the political calculations are getting harder to ignore. Republican candidates in those border districts find themselves stuck. Speaking out against the tariffs risks turning off their core supporters, but defending a policy that's clearly damaging their local economies isn't easy either, so many are keeping quiet, crossing their fingers that it doesn't become the main issue in their campaigns. Carney, on the other hand, faces no such dilemma. He can highlight Canada's improving stats, new global connections scramble to justify why main streets near the border are struggling. Coming up, we'll look at what the future might hold. As we peer ahead, the big question is whether this back and forth between Canada and the US can keep going like this, and how things might evolve as both sides navigate through 2026. The Eurasia Group's idea of a zombie USMCA really nails an important aspect of the current situation. The deal isn't operating as originally intended, but it hasn't been torn apart either. Trump doesn't seem keen on fully reviving it or scrapping it completely. Instead, he's applying it tactically, hitting certain sectors while keeping the overall structure in place. This odd balance actually gives Carney more room to maneuver than it does for American voters. I'll zero in probably keep the pressure on during 2026, as these will shape the coming chapter of the the auto sector continues to be the hottest point of contention. The North American car industry is so intertwined after decades of development, with components crossing borders. Trump's tariffs here are hurting Canadian parts makers. In places like Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, steel and aluminum follow a similar pattern. Canadian suppliers are under strain, but American factories relying on that metal end up with higher expenses that often get handed over to consumers back home. Every targeted tariff creates pain on both sides, yet the political fallout tends to hit America harder since Canadian voters aren't the ones seeing their key industries in swing states of Carney's falter. Carney's approach shows he understands he doesn't have to come out on top in every single fight. He simply needs to ride out this phase of American policy, while laying down a stronger, more similar pressures down the line. The China Agreement is a similar example. The China Agreement is the standout example, but there are plenty more. Canadian trade teams have been busy behind the scenes in Europe, Southeast Asia, India, and Latin America all through 2025 and now into 2026, striking new deals on agriculture, energy, and tech collaboration. Each of these steps slowly reduces reliance on the U.S. market and blunts the edge of potential future tariffs. It's a steady, low-key plan that doesn't grab flashy headlines, but the results are showing up clearly in those latest fiscal reports from Minister Champagne. The American playbook is pretty sharp. While Carney focused on careful step-by-step broadening of options, the Trump side went for all-out challenges China, Europe, and Asian allies. Tariffs against Canada, Mexico, China, Europe, and Asian allies. The thinking was that America's economic muscle would make everyone fold and take poorer deals, but instead it's pushed major economies to speed up their own efforts, become less dependent on the U.S. Canada stands out the most because the bonds between our countries run so deep. Seeing this level of Canadian worldwide and over time, yet the same thing is happening worldwide, with times it could chip away at America's global economic clout no matter who's in the Oval Office after 2028. The real test is if American voters start linking these trade choices to the struggles they see in their own neighborhoods. People in the border states are already doing. The bigger unknown is whether folks further inland, where the effects feel less direct, will make those same connections ahead of the 2026 midterms that could redraw the political map. To wrap this all up, thus, when you step back and look at the full picture of what's going between Canada and the United States, it's clear we're living through a truly significant moment in history. The daily headlines might not always convey the scale of it, but Mark Carney has shown that a smaller nation, led with thought to economic heat from a much bigger neighbor, not only avoid falling apart, but keep moving forward. On the other side, Donald Trump has illustrated how hardline tariff tactics against closely linked trading partners can end up costing the imposing country more than intended. These takeaways are going to be analyzed by experts for a long time to come. The budget update that Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne released last week stands as solid number that a smart 21st century economic game plan can succeed. Carney wagered on spreading out trade partners, using the bill to at-risk industries at homes, and that using patient negotiations rather than knee-jerk reactions, with a tighter deficit delivering results with a tighter growth. And the deficit ongoing and broader international links all lining up to confirm Canada made the right call. The side-by-side view with American towns makes it even clearer. Places like Detroit seeing fewer Canadian guests, Niagara Falls with fading tourism. Hey-biz Ibis Washington state communities dealing with shutdowns, and quiet Vermont ski resorts. These aren't just cold stats on a chart. They're living, breathing communities dealing with the fallout from a policy meant to shield them. It's worth highlighting those support initiatives. The $1.5 billion Tariff Relief Fund, and the $500 million Targeted Regional Program. They show how Carney leadership might not make foresaw the troubles. This type of Carney's government measures in place early, and put protective make for exciting sound bites, but it leads to meaningful, lasting, positive effects. Canadian workers in autos, steel, and aluminum have backing that stops short-term issues from turning into long-term playing out stateside. Contrast that with how things are playing out stateside, where impacted areas have been mostly left to handle the results of decisions made in Washington without much direct assistance. That difference in how the two administrations are looking after their coal tells its own important tale. Thinking about the road forward, that China trade arrangement, letting it be 9,000 electric vehicles with better tariff treatment while gaining easier access to crabs and peas, could turn out to be one of the most clever Canadian trade moves in years. Primoxic, it doesn't only opens to other global players that Canada is ready to do business on its own terms, without needing a green light on its own prices. That message is already influenced from Washington. How investors, supply chain managers. In essence, Carney has helped Canada step into its position as an independent middle power, with real freedom to even after this tariff freedom event chart its course. And those benefits will keep coming and Top Chapter eventually closes. Thank you so much for joining us here on Political Insight Live as we unpacked Canada's Mark Carney's against the tariff approach is transforming trade across North America. Approach is transforming trade across a thought. If this kind of deep dive resonated with you, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel while hitting the notification bell. That way, you'll always catch our takes on the developments that truly count. We focus on the geopolitical and economic shifts that Apport lets us keep delivering these detailed breakdowns. Go ahead and subscribe these detailed breakdowns. Go ahead and subscribe, turn on those notifications, and I'll catch you in the next one with more crucial insights you won't want to miss.